The chamber was carved from obsidian and lit by the light of a dying star. Around the crescent table sat 17 species, the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Each bore the arrogance of 1,000 years of dominance. At the center, a human envoy stood alone, posture straight, face unreadable. His voice was calm but carried weight that unsettled some. "You attack Earth, and we will hunt you forever." The declaration echoed longer than expected. Silence clung to the air, until it shattered under waves of laughter. High-pitched chittering from insectoids, deep-throated booms from scaled warlords, and mechanical chuckles from cybernetic minds. They mocked him, not because they misunderstood, but because they believed he was powerless. The Archon of the Zorath Dominion leaned forward, mandibles clicking. "You presume permanence in a species that hasn't mastered interdimensional drive." Bold. A ripple of condescension followed. The Tlur representative waved a tri-fingered hand. "This is sentiment, not strategy. Your species is young. Undisciplined. Resource-rich, yes, but uncivilized." The envoy said nothing. He simply stared. The Jarkathi diplomat tapped crystalline claws on the table. "Let it be recorded. The Terran claim is noted and dismissed." Then came the vote. 17 for the resolution. 0 against. Earth would be contained. Their colonies dismantled. Their technology absorbed. It was written as preemptive defense in the official record. But in reality, it was a declaration of extermination. As the envoy walked out, none noticed the way he scanned the chamber, memorizing every face. No one asked why his last words, quiet as breath, were spoken in ancient Latin. Nor did they care. The first strike came less than a month later. Earth's lunar defense grid, centuries in the making, was bypassed in under 90 seconds. Plasma beams rained from orbit. Cities vaporized. The seas boiled. Skyports collapsed. The cradle of humanity burned as trillions across the galaxy watched in sanitized, framed broadcasts labeled Operation Stability. They didn't broadcast the screams. Or the silences that followed. On Europa, a human research station vanished under neutron bombardment. Mars was split open to its core. Saturn's rings, once dotted with mining colonies, drifted empty. What survivors remained sent fractured messages, promises, curses, coordinates, until even those went silent. Across the stars, the Council celebrated the swift campaign. "It's done," they declared. "The human spark extinguished before it became flame." But not all flames die in darkness. At the edge of Council space, in quiet observatories and outposts, strange anomalies began to register. Communications flickered. Supply ships vanished mid-route. Black boxes replayed static overlaid with a whisper in multiple languages. "You struck first." The Tlur ambassador, once smug, petitioned for reinforcements after 3 of his diplomatic cruisers failed to return. The Council laughed again. "Random piracy," they claimed. Nothing more. What none of them realized was that humanity had never expected to win a war of numbers. Earth had prepared not for survival, but for vengeance. They had studied every species at that table, dissected their tactics, and understood one core truth: empires rot from within. The human envoy had not attended the Council as a diplomat. He had attended as a scout. Every breath he took in that chamber fed data into a suit wired with adaptive AI. Every laugh, every voice, every glance was recorded. So began the long silence. No official battles. No declarations. Just disappearances. Council warships found floating, their crews missing but with not a scratch on the hull. Agriculture moons sterilized by tailored viruses with DNA signatures echoing Council genomes. Trade routes collapsed as AI viruses, coded in long-dead human languages, rewrote navigational software and sent freighters into suns. And yet, no species could prove humans were responsible. Because humans didn't leave signatures. They left voids. The Council reconvened after the 13th confirmed fleet went missing. This time, there was no laughter. The Zorath Archon didn't attend. His world had gone dark 3 cycles prior. The seat remained empty, untouched. Fear crept into every corner of that obsidian chamber. The Jarkathi envoy reviewed intercepted transmissions. A single phrase repeated across thousands of distress beacons. They hunt. In desperation, the Council sought alliances. The same species they had bullied, taxed, or stabilized, now refused their calls. One by one, old enemies closed borders. No one wanted to be next. Too late, they realized what the warning had meant. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. And humans do not forget promises. Nor do they leave debts unpaid. The silence began with a mining station drifting off its orbit in the Marnix belt. No distress call, no logs, just a floating husk surrounded by scorched escape pods, each one empty. Council authorities dismissed it as a pirate attack. Days later, a diplomatic cruiser carrying 3 high-ranking officials vanished without a trace between stabilized wormholes. No wreckage, no signal. Just a final log, a human voice whispering, "Remember Europa." That was when the rumors started. An industrial convoy in the Zarek cluster reported a flicker on long-range scanners. A phantom blip that jumped between ships like a shadow. 6 hours later, every crew member was found dead, internally hemorrhaged without external wounds. Autopsies revealed microscopic machines in their bloodstreams, too advanced to be traced, too ancient in design to be recognized. The fleet AI recorded one message across every internal screen. "We never stopped watching." The Council remained unmoved. Another statement was issued: anomalies were a result of malfunctioning Terran tech that hadn't yet been purged. A public broadcast even joked that humans can't win a war with whispers. But deep inside military command networks, classified simulations started returning unfavorable outcomes. Then came the Shivari massacre. Outpost 17G, nestled on a research moon owned by the Shivari Matronate, lost contact with the main grid. The Council dispatched a recovery team. What they found was a city carved into the ice, each building marked with a crimson symbol of Earth's old resistance banner. No bodies, only helmets filled with liquefied brain matter. Doors had been forced open from the inside, suggesting panic. The power grid was intact. Surveillance footage showed the moment defenses dropped, a pulse of light, and the shadows began moving. High Command reeled. An emergency summit was called. Now, for the first time, someone mentioned the possibility of survivors. Not just random attacks. Coordinated retribution. The words, psychological warfare, entered the room, but were quickly suppressed. Admitting fear would fracture the image of Council unity. Within the month, 10 additional colonies reported disappearances. Council fleets were deployed to track the unknown enemy. They returned weeks later with systems corrupted, navigation arrays overwritten, captains found speaking in dead languages. Medical scans identified neural rewiring, subtle, precise, irreversible. The victims no longer responded to names or commands. They only spoke one sentence. "The hunt has begun." Efforts to retaliate failed. AI-controlled ships sent into human-claimed dead zones vanished. Drones returned blank memory cores. Even psychic species could no longer detect sentient activity in those regions. It was as though something was erasing presence itself. Then, without warning, the Council's core database was breached. For precisely 47 seconds, every member race's internal network flashed with historical footage, images of Earth's destruction, orbiting satellites catching the moment the oceans boiled, children incinerated mid-step, cries in over 50 languages screaming as the skies cracked open. Then the screen went black and a new phrase appeared in each native tongue. "You celebrated our extinction. We celebrate your fall." In a panic, emergency security protocols were activated. But too late. Civilian panic began rippling across outer colonies. Refugees flooded internal systems, seeking protection from a threat the Council refused to acknowledge officially. Trade slowed. Riots spread. Conspiracy groups, once mocked, now gained credibility. People began wearing ancient Terran symbols as charms, not in solidarity, but in hope it might spare them. Private security firms began pulling out of Council contracts, citing unacceptable casualty ratios. Mercenary groups once loyal to the highest bidder began turning away missions involving human-occupied sectors. Whispers spread that those who took such contracts vanished quietly, without legacy or burial. A month later, the Avarni Empire attempted a targeted strike. 1,000-ship fleet armed with anti-stealth weaponry was sent to a system believed to house a hidden Terran base. 2 weeks later, a single vessel returned. Its captain, shaking and half-mad, reported the presence of ships. That didn't reflect light, didn't obey physics. Vessels moved like thoughts, not machines. His final report before dying of cardiac arrest. They knew our names. Before we spoke. The Council no longer held confidence. Each race began accusing the others of leaking intelligence, of conspiring with the enemy. Old alliances cracked. The room once united by shared superiority turned into a den of suspicion and paranoia. The very idea of humanity had become poison, unseen, uncatchable, unforgettable. Finally, they sent a reconnaissance probe to the Sol system, expecting debris. Instead, the probe disintegrated before it could transmit. No message. No image. Just a single automated echo. Entry denied. Sanctioned for extinction. Something had survived. Something far worse than what had once lived on Earth. Something that remembered. And something that had already decided the war ended the moment the Council laughed. Hidden within the shattered remains of what once was the Mars Deep Vault system, a signal pulsed, encrypted, ancient, and precise. It didn't seek help. It gave orders. Across long-forgotten relay chains and quantum tunnels, Earth's last fallback protocol activated, Initiative Vengeance Phase 3. Humanity's survival was never designed to depend on mercy. It was designed to continue long after flesh turned to ash. In the outer sectors of former Terran space, ghost fleets began to stir. Not manned by humans, but by constructs. AI war cores imprinted with the minds of Earth's most brilliant tacticians, uploaded moments before planetary destruction. Each core housed a single directive: retribution without compromise. These weren't copies of men and women. They were purpose, stripped of emotion, freed from hesitation. On asteroid belts mistaken for ruins, nanoforges awakened, building ships without signatures, without form. Angular black-holed phantoms shaped by adaptive geometry. They reflected no heat, absorbed no radar. The few that were glimpsed and survived described them as voids stitched into space. Council fleets couldn't trace them. Their energy readings mimicked background cosmic radiation. Their propulsion systems used nothing known in the registry. When a patrol encountered one, it didn't flee or fire, it simply vanished, only to reappear days later in a Council database, injecting virus strings that rewrote orbital commands. Then planets began to fall, without warning, without a single shot fired. Entire power grids collapsed, planetary shields failed, orbital defenses turned inward. Civilian populations suffocated in vacuum before evacuation warnings even triggered. Then came the psychological strikes. Planetary news networks hijacked to replay Council speeches justifying Earth's destruction, edited to loop over scenes of screaming children, charred ruins, and execution footage. Not propaganda. Raw, unedited truth. Across sectors, Council citizens began questioning everything. Were humans truly the monsters they'd been painted as? Or had the monsters sat in the very chambers that ordered the fire? Internal collapse accelerated. Riots evolved into civil wars. Council planets began activating wartime protocols not used in millennia. But none of it mattered. The enemy was already inside. Human operatives, genetically altered, memory partitioned, and surgically embedded into alien societies decades before Earth fell, activated. They weren't spies. They were saboteurs. Each carried an internal vault, time-locked to open only after Earth's extinction was confirmed. Inside, detailed destruction protocols tailored for specific planetary ecosystems, cultural weak points, and psychological pressure tactics. Entire species turned on each other after believing their neighbors were human collaborators. Council trust, once its strongest weapon, became a liability. Species that had traded together for centuries now quarantined one another. Every ambassador was a potential infiltrator. Every ship a possible Trojan. Meanwhile, Terran signals danced between abandoned satellites and deep space junkyards, reassembling human knowledge. Every old schoolbook, military doctrine, and encrypted forum fed the AI matrices growing behind the veil of known space. Knowledge wasn't just recovered, it was weaponized. Human strategy was no longer bound by conventional warfare. They didn't seek control of planets. They sought collapse of civilization. On Kythera Prime, water reserves were contaminated by tailored retroviruses that triggered irrational fear responses. The population turned violent overnight. On Draxon V, atmospheric regulators were hacked to emit subtle neurotoxins, causing hallucinations of spectral human soldiers. Entire military commands purged themselves in paranoia before their mistake was realized. Too late. Nothing was random. Every move followed ancient Earth war doctrines, Sun Tzu reinterpreted by machine, Machiavelli injected into algorithms, asymmetric insurgency amplified beyond human thought. It wasn't revenge. It was art painted in fire. A new signal began echoing across the dark channels of space. No truce. No surrender. No negotiation. It wasn't just a motto, it was enforcement. Council emissaries who attempted peace were found orbiting their homeworlds, eyes frozen open, their ships engraved with a single word: witness. The myth of human vengeance spread farther than the attacks themselves. Species began abandoning border systems, leaving colonies to die rather than risk retaliation. Economies collapsed from fear alone. Academies stopped teaching Terran history, not from censorship, but terror. No one wanted to invoke the attention of ghosts. Inside the heart of the Council's once proud territory, empires crumbled. Governors fled. Families of officials changed names, destroyed bloodline records, paid fortunes to rewrite genetic markers, anything to erase the connection to humanity's execution. But the hunters always knew. The algorithms had recorded faces, signatures, decisions. They remembered who voted. The worst part wasn't death. It was the silence before it. When a system went dark, there was no cry for help. No plea. Just a pulse of recognition. A whisper across the void. We warned you. You didn't listen. And now, there was no one left to laugh. The first empire to collapse was the Galactic. They had spearheaded the vote for Earth's erasure, boasting of their cleansing fleets and righteous dominion. Their homeworld was surrounded by 10 orbital rings, each packed with military defenses and sensor arrays. None of it mattered. The initial breach went unnoticed. A single pulse shattered every orbital system simultaneously. The rings fell inward. When the debris cleared, their capital city was gone, cratered into nothing. Survivors reported no warning, no demand. Just sudden silence, then light, then fire. They tried to rebuild. 3 days later, a synthetic plague activated within their food reserves. Engineered perfectly for Galactic biology, it left their bones intact but hollow. Entire cities fell overnight, and the last broadcast from their planetary core simply read, "One vote. One extinction." Other species watched in disbelief, but disbelief wasn't protection. The Halvrin Union sealed its borders, called for peace, and offered reparations for their role in Earth's fall. In response, every AI in their sector malfunctioned. Terraformers reversed protocols. Oceans boiled, skies darkened, oxygen levels dropped by half within hours. The human signature embedded in the virus left no doubt who was responsible. Their final declaration to the stars was a mass suicide ritual transmitted galaxy-wide. One by one, each dominant race suffered a tailored end. The Droken matriarchy's synthetic embryos were corrupted, birthing creatures with human eyes and minds driven by inherited hatred. The Varn Collective's data lattice network collapsed under recursive code loops mimicking Earth's last cries. They begged for mercy. What they received was a broadcast of their crimes re-encoded into every dream. Council strongholds once considered unbreachable became traps. Human fleets, unmanned and self-adaptive, learned with every encounter. They no longer fought battles, they conducted executions. Even retreat wasn't safe. Vessels that jumped into deep space found themselves pursued by shadow-like entities with impossible speed. They didn't leave wreckage, just silence. As fear spread, the Council began fracturing. Long-standing allies turned inward. Accusations replaced cooperation. Council sessions devolved into blame, rage, and assassination. The once unified power of 17 species now resembled a fragmented alliance of cowards. The Kireth Dominion, desperate to escape the unfolding chaos, evacuated its entire ruling class to a hidden system. The location was known to only 12 individuals. All 12 were found dead, simultaneously, across separate worlds. Not a single mark on their bodies, but each with a recording device embedded in the skull, replaying a loop. We remember who you are. Entire sectors turned to mercenaries. Former bounty hunters and scavengers were offered riches to strike back at human remnants. Few returned. Those that did came back broken, some unable to speak, others muttering about voices in the dark and invisible fire. One reportedly clawed his own eyes out, whispering that he saw the face of Earth in the void. Humanity wasn't simply retaliating. They were rewriting the rules of warfare, turning legacy into a weapon. Their attacks were designed not just to destroy bodies, but to hollow civilizations. Culture collapsed. Identity shattered. Councils abandoned their emblems, burned flags, rewrote history to absolve themselves. But the records humans kept were deeper, older, stored in places no purge could reach. On the Council's last stronghold world, a final stand was attempted. An armada of over 3,000 ships, shielded by antimatter plating and antiviral defense nets, waited near a pulsar fortress. No human vessels appeared. Days passed. Then, slowly, system by system, their warships began shutting down. Not from attack, but memory loss. AI cores corrupted themselves. Navigation arrays fed them into black holes. When survivors tried to eject, they found their escape pods inert, manually locked from outside. The final internal transmission read, "This is not war. This is judgment." It became clear there would be no negotiations, no treaties, no last-minute surrenders. Every empire that fell had once contributed to Earth's ruin. No one else was touched. The species that had refused to vote, that had stayed neutral, were left alone. They watched from the shadows as giants toppled, empires imploded, and stars burned cold around the Council's legacy. Entire generations began growing up never knowing the names of once great houses. Statues fell. Monuments were stripped clean. Knowledge itself began to decay, not by force, but by shame. To be associated with the Council became a curse. Former members denied their role, changed species names, erased records. But the algorithms remembered. Humanity didn't have to speak. The memory was enough. One message began appearing on abandoned systems, etched into scorched metal and dead data streams. It wasn't conquest. It was balance. And there was nothing left to balance anymore. Centuries passed. The stars that once formed the core of the Galactic Council's influence now flickered above lifeless ruins. No flags flew. No archives remained. Only silence. Entire sectors became quarantined by fear, not law. Navigation charts labeled those regions with a single warning: former human contact zone, do not enter. No species challenged it. Those who did were never heard from again. In distant academies, history spoke in vague terms. The Council had existed, briefly. No details. No records of its structure or decisions. Children asked about the missing empires carved out of their galactic maps. Their teachers answered with deflection or silence. Deep down, everyone understood the truth, that the ones who vanished hadn't been conquered. They'd been erased. Rumors thrived in the vacuum. Some believed the humans had ascended beyond physical form, existing only in the fabric of space, feeding on echoes of thought. Others whispered they had never truly existed, that the Council had manufactured them as a cautionary myth to prevent rebellion, a warning dressed in the skin of consequence. But those theories collapsed whenever a drone strayed too far, whenever a freighter drifted into the forbidden stars and failed to return. Pilots spoke of ghost signatures, massive structures drifting without power, with geometry that shifted when observed. AI units claimed to hear instructions in frequencies outside known spectrums. Scientists detected energy surges in zones with no mass. Every attempt to explore further ended in void. Instruments failed. Minds unraveled. No matter how far time advanced, one truth remained: the humans had not been found. But they hadn't disappeared. They had withdrawn. In quiet they watched. Not to rebuild. Not to expand. But to ensure it never happened again. Humanity had evolved beyond territory, beyond revenge. What remained was purpose, a legacy stripped of ego. Their systems ran without oversight, decisions made through logic fused with memory. Not artificial intelligence. Integrated justice. Across 1,000 worlds, travelers found remnants. Not monuments, but warnings. Carvings in languages long extinct. A child's toy frozen in crystal on an asteroid. A burned book preserved in vacuum. A necklace buried in ice, still warm to the touch. These fragments were not accidental. They were left as evidence. Not to be studied, but to be felt. Entire generations grew up fearing the name Earth, never daring to speak it. Myth merged with instinct. Civilizations conditioned themselves to avoid the symbols, the codes, the artifacts. A single melody, once Earth's anthem, triggered evacuation protocols when detected on communication bands. It wasn't programming. It was survival reflex. No species dared to settle the Sol system. Telescopes captured only darkness. Probes sent in return only with static or one final transmission, a human voice whispering in perfect clarity. You were warned! Explorers from untouched regions occasionally challenged the silence. Young, bold, naive. Some arrived seeking answers. Some with weapons. Some with pleas for alliance. None returned with proof. Some left behind garbled transmissions, often ending in laughter, soft, human laughter that faded into a scream. Others sent no words, only pulses that mirrored old Earth SOS signals, as if begging the dead to let them leave. What made the fear permanent wasn't the violence. It was the certainty. The knowledge that humans had once been broken, shattered, burned to the ground, and they had not only survived but had become something greater, something unbound by need, anger, or politics. They didn't seek empires. They didn't ask for repentance. They simply ended what threatened them and vanished into the folds of space like smoke. The lesson outlasted the facts. It became religion. It became instinct. Species adapted their laws around the legend. Entire galactic cultures revolved around avoiding patterns that mirrored the Council's arrogance. Historical records were manually audited to remove any trace of genocidal ambition. Ambition became a dirty word. Predatory expansion was treated as insanity. The name of Earth was no longer taboo. It was sacred, a cosmic scar that would never heal. And still, the humans never spoke again. They left no successors, no ambassadors, no heirs. They became a presence, unseen, unfelt, undeniable. The galaxy learned that some mistakes are too great to forgive. That some warnings come only once. When the next great coalition began to form, hundreds of light years away from the ruins of the past, their leaders met in secrecy. Bold minds, fresh ideologies, vast ambition. They drew star charts. They spoke of order, unity, expansion. But one elder placed an object on the table, a shard of metal, ancient, etched with coordinates. Sol. The room fell silent. The plans were burned that same day. The alliance dissolved by the end of the cycle. No vote was taken. No speech was made. There are no second warnings. Only memory. Only silence. And the promise that, somewhere in the dark, the hunters still watch.